So, good afternoon, Tess. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you, and thank you for having me. Delighted.
No,
to be
thank
with
you. And you've been busy, obviously doing this new book, which I'm going to hold up. Ta-da! Got it in front of me. You kindly sent this to me pre-Christmas, so this was some of my Christmas reading. I'm always interested, before we get into the thrust of what we're going to talk about, leadership. People that have done a book. Talk to me about the process. How exciting was it for you?
Super exciting and a bit surreal.
Yeah.
I've had writing a book in my head for a few years.
Sure.
And I've known what direction it was going to be. It was going to be around the leadership and the coaching space, because that's where a big chunk of my time is spent in business. And actually, it's where I get the fire in my belly, really helping individuals fly. In terms of the process of the book, the thing that actually got it on paper, well, COVID helped a little bit, because obviously I was locked up at home. The other thing that I did is I signed up with a book coach. So that was coincidentally, to a degree, on World Book Day. I signed up to work with this lady, and every Friday for 12 weeks, I had to have written a chapter of the book. So she helped me, of course, scope it out first, and then get some clarity in my mind around each of the chapters. And then that was it. I was off in the writing mode. So yeah, every Friday I was had my feet held to the fire, had a chapter. And so then it went out for some lovely feedback from some test readers before finishing up.
Congratulations, because lots of us, including me during lockdown, weren't writing books. We were probably doing TikTok videos and different things like that. So, but it's interesting that you had a coach, and we're going to talk about some of the work you do. Specifically, we're going to talk about leadership today in the 20 to 30 minutes that we've got. And I should say, for people that are watching, we have got quite a few. Please, if you have a question or a comment on anything we discuss over that time, please put it in the comments box, whether you're watching on YouTube or on LinkedIn, and I would try and put it to Tess. So, Tess, specifically, my audience are event and exhibition professionals. And around this time, January, lots of people are posting on LinkedIn that they've been promoted. And leadership means different things, right? So you could be leading a team of 2 people, 1 person, or a company. And I know specifically you work with senior leaders. But to start off with, can you define, if possible, what leadership means to you?
Yeah, of course. And just as a precursor to that, I would say that I've grown up through organizations myself, when I've only had a team of 1, a team of 2, and then up to many, many more than that. So I understand from the experience of, that incremental movement. And so I suppose the way that I would describe really good leadership, it's a combination of setting a really clear direction, involving people in how they can get to that direction. So that co-creation is key, in my view. And then being able to bring people with them by inspiring, by spending time with people. And something we'll probably circle back a few times around is one-to-one time with people, being really clear about who are you, who am I, why should you follow me? So that trust on the individual level, I think, is key. So we're answering the why, we're answering the why are we here, what are we doing, and who are you? So I think those are the key things.
And it's interesting as well, because we might think of leadership in a business perspective, but obviously in our daily lives, we have to lead, in inverted commas, in certain situations, whether we're, out at a shop or cinema or something, might thrust us into a leadership situation, or at home, dare I say. And I know you talk a lot about, in your work and in the book and in a lot of articles that I've read, that, you sort of need to bring that into your being, into a work environment as well.
Yeah, so I've in the book, and thank you for taking the time to read that. In the book, I start with, and I think this is another attribute of good leadership, I start with talking about my own journey, and in particular the difficult parts.
Sure.
So I think that's a really important element. And my difficult parts weren't in the work situation, they were outside of work. But of course, we can't separate ourselves. We're not 2 different people, we're actually the same person. So if we can be in a business, if I bring it into that context, allowing people to be a whole person so that they can flip into those leadership positions regardless of the context.
Sure.
And I think as leaders, as managers of others, helping people grow to be able to do that flex, I think is really important as well.
Yes, it's very much, I don't know, you do this taking the holistic approach, right? So it's not a question of you leave the front door, you go to work and you're a different person, actually drawing on some of the strengths and in certain occasions, I guess, framed weaknesses that people have and actually developing them as a more rounded human being, right?
Yeah, and I would go as far as to say, there's many things that have evolved since the era called COVID. I think one of the things that the big ask of managers and leaders since COVID is we have to be, in my view, better at thinking about the person as a whole person. Because quite often you're asking them to work at their peak and they're sitting in the kitchen, or they're in a flat share and they've got lots of other variables around them. So if we don't think about them as a whole person in a different context, then I think we're diluting the value that we can add.
Sure. And we're going to come and talk about the different situations that people are now finding themselves in terms of leadership. And again, specifically January, new leaders, new positions, and actually managing a team and maybe different circumstances. I've been doing a lot of reading and also soul searching. We spoke about this beforehand in terms of the leader that I've been. And I read about, you've got different types of leaders, depending on what article you read. There might be 15 types, 10 types. I quite like what I've got down here, which is distilling it into 3 types: autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. So it's sort of easygoing. In your experience, does that resonate with you in your work with leaders? Have you found there's a commonality between, 3 or 4 different traits?
Yeah, and there's a lot of research on this as well, Dan. So there's some great work that's come out of Corporate Leadership Council, Korn Ferry Hay Group, around exactly this point. And it sits in that domain of what's often called emotional intelligence. And what the research tells us is there is a range of styles, and depending on, as you say, what article, what framework, that can be, a small number like 3 up to 12 typically. I tend to use a framework that's got 6, but the point being, we know from the research that you need to be able to flex, and a minimum of 2 in your toolkit is really, really important, because that helps you be you're more able to flex depending on the people that you've got, depending on the situation. And that can sometimes be a challenge, because on the flip side, we often hear about integrity and being true to who you are.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can feel contradictory about flexing and then being true to who you are. What I would say, and what I've learned, I guess, myself, is be really clear on my core values, but flex my behavior across those styles, depending on, are we in crisis mode? Or is it business as usual? And who am I leading, and what kind of behavior from me will get the best out of them?
Sure. That's a really good point, because I think, I've done it myself, and I was saying to you beforehand, when I was in my 20s, when I was sort of thrust into leadership, I guess I felt I had to tell people what to do, maybe. And as you grow, you understand that a consultative approach for a lot of occasions might be better. But actually what you're saying is you don't have to, you need a flexible, fluid framework. You can't be rigid in that respect. And actually you can flex between autocracy, having a consultative approach, and not worrying that, you're letting your guard down in certain situations, or people are going to take you as a weak leader, whatever that whatever.
Yeah, 100%.
The notion of born leaders, right? So we hear this a lot. That person, he, she it was born to lead. Do you think it is more more nature than nurture, or a combination, or are there born leaders?
Well, let me hold that question alongside what's the perfect leader.
Yeah.
And my view is there isn't one.
Okay.
And so I don't, and for a long time haven't aspired to be a specific person, as a role model. What I would aspire, which I think is far more powerful and actually far more accessible, is to think about the attributes of certain people. And you can harvest some attributes from one and other attributes for another.
Sure.
So coming back to the nature nurture, there'll be some things that are more natural for you. So being directive, having a real, being able to articulate a story and a narrative, that may come very naturally to you, but other aspects of leadership might not, in which case that's when coaching, development, and having a role model can help. So you can build that part of your portfolio up. So
Sure.
I don't think there's one set of attributes that make you a natural born leader, but
Sure.
make the most of what you are born with, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm sort of thinking that in crisis situations, wherever that may be, some people do tend to just step up and come to the front, right? And I've noticed it in the last 18 months, and when the pandemic hit and the company I was in, all of a sudden certain people that weren't necessarily in a leadership position just came to the fore and put their hand up and got on with doing stuff. And maybe others that were leaders by their role shrunk a bit.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
I can really associate with that, because if we drop down into what is that telling us, there will be some individuals where their natural style is about structure, it's about clarity, it's about that direction setting, and pre-COVID they would be able to lean on that strength. But during COVID, there was no knowns. It was very ambiguous. It was complex. It was frustrating. And there are other people who are much more comfortable in that kind of environment. So they feel more comfortable to step forward and play to their strengths. So it's quite interesting how those two things played out. I've seen that as well.
Sure. We just touched upon it earlier, but it'd be good just to delve into it a little bit more. You talk about authentic leadership quite a bit and leaders speaking their truth. Can you just explain that a bit more, what you mean by that?
Yeah, so, I'll talk about the, I know you read one of the articles that that came out of this, and a poem that was intending to articulate that process. And it came from a really difficult experience. I won't go into in minutiae, but I'll give you a flavor. I was in another country in the middle of nowhere on a training program. And I've only ever experienced this once, but the trainer, to say that they were difficult, pedantic, harsh, demanding, and actually to the point where they were physically, invading your space would be an understatement.
Sure.
It felt like a very threatening place to be. Never, thank God, experienced it since, never before. And my initial response was to stand back, to shy away, and not to say anything, and be, to comply, if you like, with the rules of their game. And that was not who I am. But I was in that situation that this is my survival mechanism. I just need to withdraw. And actually, over the course of a couple of days, I realized actually I need to be who I am. And I really did a bit of soul searching over those 72 hours. And no, I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. I'm going to be really clear on who I am, what I will accept and what I won't accept. And by the third day, I got to a place where I just put my foot down and said, no, you're now crossing a boundary of what's no longer appropriate. Now, hopefully people don't generally experience that in a work environment, but by speaking your truth, what I'm referring to there is be really clear who you are, stand on your values, have them, as holding you in a place of consistent behavior, and show up in the world where people would be happy to be around you, and then you can choose yes or no depending on what's happening in any situation. But yeah, my initial was to withdraw, and actually I completely lost myself. But within 72 hours, is no, I need to find me and put myself, on the table, so to speak.
Sure.
In terms of what's appropriate.
Very insightful. Thank you. And you mentioned truth there. And I guess leadership is sort of in the news at the moment with our esteemed Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah.
Do you think there's ever a time where leaders, not necessarily lie, but for the greater good, don't always have to or shouldn't tell the truth because they need to take a team or in this maybe instance of our Prime Minister, the country on a journey, and actually, you know, you don't want to instill fear, you want to instill confidence. So you might not necessarily believe what you're saying, but you feel it's appropriate to say it.
That's a really difficult one, you know, but both at that societal level, but also on a practical day-by-day level as well. And I guess I would say a couple of things here. One is, if I bring it into an organizational context, it's not helpful. And in fact, people will normally smell it a mile off when we have secrets.
Yeah.
So if there's a secret, I think we can undervalue that intuition that people have. They'll know there's something rumbling. And so it's not helpful, because what happens in the absence of the truth and in the absence of, you know, the real deal being spoken, is people will make up a story, and often it's a story far worse than is the reality. So if I start with that as a basic premise.
Sure.
And of course, if you have a few iterations of secrets or lack of truth telling, then of course you get to a place where you lose completely the level of trust. And when you've lost that, it's very hard to get back again. You know, and again, there's loads of research around the importance of trust in a business relationship. And most individuals will leave their company because of their manager and that relationship, rather than the company itself.
Sure.
So it's a very delicate balance. The way I hold it for myself from a leadership point of view is I distinguish between openness and honesty.
Okay.
And if we think about, you know, some of my previous roles have been, you know, in my HR director role, for example, we would have had lots of situations where we're restructuring, we're potentially looking at redundancies. I'm not able to be fully open about that situation, but I can, if I stay authentic, let people know we're working on something. We don't know yet, but we'll know. We'll let you know when. So I can be as clear as I can without misleading, but we're not at a point where I can spill all of the information. So I keep my trust, but I don't unveil what's not ready to be unveiled. So it's a balance.
Yeah, and there's obviously nuances within that, and I think you're right, because ultimately you probably only get away with it once by saying something that's maybe not true. If you've got to work with people going forward and it comes out, then you can't do that again. You know, you might, as you said, you've broken that trust. In a situation where you can do it once, and you're maybe not seeing those people again, possibly, but you know, not if you're trying to build a culture in an organization. Just briefly, I know you work in a specific way with leaders and organizations. Can you just bring to life the systemic approach, please, that you that means?
So we think of if I talk first of all around what I mean by the word system, it's a living entity within which people work together. And I'm going to speak about it from the point of view of, you know, the working framework. When I'm working with individuals, and a lot of my work is one-to-one, but I do work quite a bit with leadership teams and getting them to think about the organization as a whole system. And so, but if I reference here specifically the one-on-one work, quite often when I'm working with a leader, we will have the dynamics of their personal system, i.e. their family setting, playing out in the organization. So there are certain patterns that belong in their family that, without them realizing it, they're unconsciously playing out in the organization. And there was a great article in Harvard Business Review in the last couple of weeks, and it was called something like "The Family Ghosts in the Executive Suite." And that's the essence of what we're talking about here. We don't realize sometimes that the dynamics in our family play out in the organization through our leadership. So the work that I do is to help individuals, when I'm working individually, unpack of what's happening, what belongs to my personal system, and actually what belongs to this organization. And to the right extent separate out the two. And then if I stay with your question, what do we mean by systemic? Then we say, well, what's needed for a healthy organizational system? And there's many layers here, but I'll just give you
Sure.
high level. We need a sense of order. So a sense of order means people can find their place in the system. It feels like there's a mutual exchange, there's a give and take. We have an honoring of the history, and we have a sense of belonging. So there's some really big fundamental things there that give you a sense of order. By orientation, which is the second of the 3 O's, we have a sense of purpose. Why do we exist? And then a clear sense of leadership to bring everyone with them. And then the final of the 3 O's around a healthy system is around we have an openness to be able to touch into what's happening in the sector, what's happening in the industry. We have an openness to evolve and experiment. We're not, we do this and we do nothing else. We're this, very tight boundaries. The whole system wants to grow, so we can be open to those signals.
Thank you. I think because obviously leaders don't operate in a vacuum, right? They operate within a framework of a business, whether that's a global business or one location business, or
absolutely,
a small business. You also talk about in the book the need for a shift in perspective to what the organization needs from its leaders, not what the leader needs from its organization.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit about that, please?
Yes. So there's 2 fundamental mindset shifts needed to really think about the organizing system as a system, and this is one of them. And it sounds simple, but actually is quite a fundamental U-turn, if you like.
I had to read that bit many times.
Because, let's imagine we've been given our first leadership role. We really want to get into the driving seat. We want to go as fast as possible. We really want to do well. And that's very much a driving force. It's back to the directive autocratic leadership style that you were talking about earlier. But actually, far more powerful way of operating is stand back and go, what does this living entity, which is full of people trying to do their best work, need from me? So that's a very much a tell me what you need and I'll give, rather than I will ask for everything that I need in a push. So it really is a 180-degree shift.
Yeah, makes sense. You also talk about whether leadership in an organization is enabling or disabling the system.
Yes.
What do you mean by that, please?
So there'll be a number of things that can disable a system. One I've alluded to already. If the leader is playing out their family dynamic, and we'll have both positive dynamic and negative dynamics, if they're playing out those dynamics in the organization, they're not always helpful. So they could be inhibiting flow and energy and the health of the system. The other thing that will disable a system really quickly on a really practical level is if we have people underperforming and we're not addressing it, we're sending out a very mixed signal. So really being able to, and I don't mean automatically go to move those people out of the organization. What I mean is following up those individuals, find out what's happening with them, find out what's stopping them from performing, what do they need differently in order to allow them to perform. But by not doing that, you'll disable. By bringing in the wrong caliber or the wrong culture of people, you're disabling it. So there are many things that you need to have a bit of a watch out on.
Sure, thank you. I know we're not going to touch upon it today, but I know you do a lot of work with culture in an organization as well. The 2 go hand in hand. The last 18, 24 months, forget where we are, obviously lots of people working from home. I still don't know if we're under a working from home directive. We sit here in January. Who knows what we're meant to be doing and what not. But
it's a bit blurry.
Yeah, but also lots of companies that are global offices don't necessarily get together in person. And so you've probably got leaders watching this that have dealt, and new leaders that are going to be dealing with a virtual workforce, right?
Yes.
And that's very different. What sort of advice do you have for leaders, and what have you seen over the last 18 to 24 months in that area, that sort of best practice?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge it is challenging. It's not the same, and you can't copy and paste what you would normally do in the office into a virtual space. I know teams that have tried that with the best of intentions, and it's not that effective. So it's really important to acknowledge the enormity of what we're talking about. In terms of things that I've seen working, and I would, my counsel would be to really put some attention on this, is things like, is there a communal space, like a chat facility, that everyone can, be contributing to? Some people will use Slack, some people Teams, different technologies. And the reason why I'm saying that, and I start with that, is at a fundamental level for an individual, what the organization needs to give them to hold on to them is a sense of belonging.
Yes.
And so to foster and maintain that sense of belonging, is there communal spaces where people can come together even though they're not physically in the same space. So I highlight that as a really important, because that can create the camaraderie. It can enable the banter that you would normally have at the coffee machine or wherever you go for lunch. Keep that human side, that liveliness in play, and think about what might be the right technology for you to do that. Then from a manager and a leader point of view, don't underestimate the value and what people will get out of just a check-in call.
Yeah.
So one of the people that I've been coaching over the last year, a leader, is he had a bit of a revelation on how his people really appreciated a 10-minute, no agenda.
Yeah.
I know you're working on X. I know X, Y, and Z's happened at home. Just ringing to check in how you are. So again, I lay out that human side as quite an important piece. So it doesn't need to be an onerous 30-minute or an hour. A 10-minute actually has huge value. The other thing that I've seen work really well is some people will call them stand-up meetings, but that short, sharp, gather the team together virtually at the start of the week, let's say, or it could be at the end of the week. How are we doing? What's on the agenda? Anyone need any help? How can you all help each other? So there's a collective banter, collective stand-ups, and one-to-ones. I think those would be the big things I would call out.
Yeah, because I think, and again, maybe right at the beginning, where, to be fair, even the most experienced leaders hadn't experienced this situation for obvious reasons. There might have been a tendency to smother staff, trying to make them accountable every minute of the day. What are they doing?
Yes.
What are they doing? I can't see them. But then you don't see them in the office every minute, right? So that they're just getting on with their thing. And I think you talk about, and that's probably still your words, establishing a balance between driving performance and flexibility.
Yeah.
And making sure that people are still showing up and accountable, but not necessarily being on top of them every minute.
Yeah, and that's where the stand-ups will help, because you're getting everyone to call out what they're working on and where they'll be at the end of the week. And that will vary, obviously, depending on what function people are in. But that's giving a collective accountability. So it isn't just about manager and direct report, it's about the whole team, whatever size of team that is. And I think we can sometimes underplay the importance of holding each other accountable. And sometimes as an individual, we'll feel far more accountable because we've called it out to our colleagues, what we're expecting to do, than perhaps we sometimes will to our manager, because we can mitigate that and talk through things that got us blocked. But with our colleagues, we're thinking about how we're showing up. Yeah.
I've got a comment here that I put up from Mark Eddy, talking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
The emotional intelligence of a leader is paramount to work to support the success of each team, and each team member is essential in putting them before yourself as the leader. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, 100%. So that very much is that mindset shift we just talked about, is what do they need from me and how do I flex to get them to fly? Because when they fly, as the leader, we succeed anyway. So flexing to meet their needs is really where that's at.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark, for that comment. All of this impacts on staff retention, I guess. And the industry, sort of exhibition world that I operate within, and I know this firsthand, there's definitely, they're looking for staff. Lots of people have left the industry at certain levels and certain disciplines, sales, marketing being two of them, it's been quite hard to get new candidates into the building or virtually. And so it's ever more important to retain staff, right? So I guess a lot of the work you do, either directly or indirectly, impacts on that. Can you bring that to life a bit?
Yeah, so it's everything from are we recruiting the right people that have got some longevity? Are we recruiting at the right level? Because if we always, for example, if we always recruit at the senior level, but we don't actually build from the bottom and allow them to grow, then we're a bit exposed. Sure. There's also the element of, have we got the right culture where people actually enjoy being here when they arrive? So putting some attention on that, I think, is also really key.
Yeah. New leaders, we spoke about that. It's January, so some people were coming in.
Yes.
And I know traditionally you deal with a senior level, but let's say, we've got a middle manager, a team of 5 or 6 people.
Yes.
Hopefully they're going to get some coaching from internal or external. But in the short term, what are the sort of tips and advice and things that they could be doing practically in the next maybe 2 weeks?
So I think there's definitely some very practical counsel. One is, if you have literally just joined, spend time with each person and find out what you've inherited, both in terms of the people, but also, the journey that the team have been on, where they've succeeded, where they've not, and some of the root causes of that. So make sure you have a really good understanding of the history. Have a really good understanding of the people that you've got and how their needs might be different. So that would be number one. Number 2 would be then work on as quickly as possible, and ideally in collaboration with your team, our sense of purpose. Why do we exist as a collective? What's the point? If I was to put it very bluntly. Now, it's really good for you as a new leader to have a sense of that, but ideally get your people gathered and get them to help you consolidate that thinking. So why are we here? So history, why are we here? What are the roles of each member of the team? So we don't have overlapping and competing roles, but we also have really clear areas of responsibility. And then finally, spend time with each person and get the team to spend time with each other to build that trust. So those would be the big ticket items I would say are really essential for a new leader. The final thing I would say, and this is more of an ongoing one, is my particular soapbox, if I were to have one, from helping people move through the layers of management into leadership. I think it's a skill that is essential, and that's giving quality feedback. Quality constructive feedback. And if I refer back to the research I was talking about earlier, when done well, feedback can lift performance by more than 30%. So that's how essential it is. So really hone your skill around giving feedback. And by feedback, I don't just mean great job, thank you. That's not feedback. It needs to be specific.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's possibly a mistake and a tendency for maybe inexperienced leaders or people that are going to the first position to think, right, I've got to show my new team that I'm doing something, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to change that, and I'm going to do, and actually, take a step back, see what you've got, see what people want to be doing. The consultative approach in that early stage is critical.
100%.
If you get it wrong, then
and
it's going to be hard to sort of rebuild that trust going forward. So that's some really, really insightful advice. So thank you for that. And actually, I've got a comment here from Emma, who's put, this is really educational and understanding the theories of how to lead and set key examples. So thank you. Yeah, it's definitely helping already. Sadly, we are running out of time. I just want to touch upon how you work with companies and individuals. Spoken about the systemic approach, and born out of many years of implementing that approach has come your harness framework. So we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but can you just give us a sense of how that works, please, and what that means? Because obviously that's reference. That's your book, I guess, Harness.
So the name of the book is Harness, and Harness is actually a coaching framework as well. And it's a framework that embraces the systemic approach, thinking about it's an entity, and there's lots of things that are in the myriad of elements you will uncover as a leader. So the 7 key steps, so I'll just try and do this as quickly and as headline as possible, but still giving a sense of reality. Step number 1, and it alludes to what I said a moment ago around new managers, honor history. If you disrespect what's happened before, all you end up doing is triggering resistance to what you want to do. So let's first of all honor what's happened before and all of those that have contributed to it. And when I'm working with leaders one-on-one, which is what the Harness framework is, it's acknowledging they've had a journey up to this point, and it's informed who they are and how they're showing up. So let's be respectful of that. But let's also, step number 2 is the A, acknowledge the reality. There will be things that are working and things that are not. So it's finding a way to really cut through the noise and distill that. I do that through gathering stakeholder feedback 360, but there are lots of ways that you can get that reality check. That's step number 2. Step number 3 is then releasing any limiting patterns that are getting in the way of both the individual, but also the individual's team and organization. So that could be something from the family system, or it could just be something from the history that you've uncovered through that diagnosis. Then the N is nurturing that sense of awareness around, actually, this is not just about me. This is about my team. This is about a wider context. So creating that ability, as we said a second ago, to zoom back and really look at the whole. Then it's about engaging with what's trying to come here in terms of the future. Let's engage with the nudges, the intuition, the customer stories that are coming at us that give us a hint around what needs to shift. Then we have the sense of purpose. I've already mentioned how important that is. And then finally, let's solidify all of that together in terms of what's the leadership brand that you want to have as a leader. And if I could simplify that last point, what would be the few words that you would love somebody to share if they were describing you? And that's giving you a really strong hint on what your leadership brand is.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you today. You know, we've got some comments and lots of people are going to watch on demand as well. And you've really given some practical advice. If people want to work with you, I guess they can find you on LinkedIn, on your website, the Transformation Agency website. I'll hold up the book again. I'll be your publicist. It really is a great read. Harness, a systemic approach, guaranteed to revitalize your coaching, by Tess. So Tess Cope, thank you so much for your time today. We wish you the best with the book and with all the coaching you're doing with clients.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just stay in the green room and have a quick chat with you afterwards.
Okay.
So that was Tess Cope. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone watching live and on demand. Please as ever visit danassaw.com. Search for Dan Assaw on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and other platforms for all of my content. Have a great rest of the day.